tonight we have Dr. Cassandra Ma. She's here to explain about her organization that she started, Reclaim 13. The organization was created to help those who have, that have been trafficked to try to come back to a normal life. We'd like to invite Dr. Cassandra Ma to come up and tell us about her organization.
Good evening to all of you. Thank you for having us here. I say us, I'm with some friends, Melissa and Larissa, who are mentors with us, and you'll hear more about their work as well tonight. I wanted to say, as I was just taking in the group that has been so warm, you've all been so warm to us. This is one of the few presentations that I've done this whole year where we started out with prayer. And I just wanted to thank you for that. That was such a blessing to just know that this is about God. And our story has been, praise God, our story has been 11 years in the making. And just to give you a quick story, I wasn't intending to tell you this, but how we got started was really a God story in that when I heard about children who had been trafficked, my background is as a clinical psychologist. I used to work up in Northwestern teaching and supervising students and doing all the academic stuff that I enjoyed for a long time. But when I heard about kids being trafficked in the United States, particularly in Chicago area, what the statistic that was being reported at that point in time was that children who are running away from home can expect to be approached by traffickers within 48 to 72 hours. So I figured it's very simple. That gives us a 47-hour window to find these kids, to bring them to a safe place, and then they don't have to endure the trafficking that is out there. And I figured God has a GPS coordinates on these kids. You can just tell me where to go, and I'll just go and get them. So I would drive up and down the streets of Chicago and all the neighborhoods, buses, train stations, looking for kids. And that was really, frankly, how we got started. There was no intention to start anything. It was just because I wanted to find these kids and figured it was a very easy solution. It wasn't quite as easy as that, and it's actually illegal to do that, to pick up kids and put them in your car. So we started an organization to have some legitimacy and be able to do the work that we are now able to do. And so I hope to be able to tell you a little bit more about that tonight. So I entitled this, I know we're talking about human trafficking, but I entitled this Transforming the Face of Fear, because that is really what we do. Our mission is a healing mission. So there are many organizations that do many different things, from the recovery and the rescue of these children to being able to help them afterwards. And that's really what we focus on, is really how, once these kids are recovered, once they're taken out of these bad situations, what can we do to heal these children's lives so that they can grow up, as we say, in a world where all children can grow up feeling safe and loved, which is our end goal. And a part of that is about transforming the face of fear. These children have known great fear. 1 John 4:18, it says, perfect love casts out all fear. And that is what we are all about, because we have to, as adults, as good adults, as the caring adults in this world, be able to help these children see that there are adults in this world, indeed, that do care about them. They're not like the adults that they have encountered up till that point. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to kind of give you a big picture about the human trafficking picture worldwide, globally, and then kind of hone in on what we really focus on, which is child trafficking, and specifically child sex trafficking. But the latest statistics, the most reliable statistics that we have come out of the International Labor Organization, tell us that there are about almost 50 million people worldwide caught in what's considered modern-day slavery. And that number has grown over the past 5 years from 40 million to about 50 million. So it's an almost 25% increase over just a very short period of time. Trafficking has defined, human trafficking, modern-day slavery is defined into two different categories, main categories nowadays, in considered forced labor and forced marriage. And I will tell you this, and this is we're not going to get off on this tangent, but I will tell you that part of the problem that we have in this movement is that there's not a uniform definition that we use for human trafficking. So I'm going to tell you how we look at it and how we explain it to people. There's legal definitions, but there's really not an understood sort of uniform way in which the actual trafficking experiences are sort of understood in a similar way across the board. But having said that, so global sex trafficking is purportedly about 1/4 of all the victims of human trafficking worldwide. As you see on there, 3.3 million of the victims are considered are in labor trafficking. 50% of them are in commercial sexual exploitation, which is another word for trafficking. When it comes to trafficking in the United States, there are 3 elements legally that need to be proved to be able to say that this is a human trafficking case. Those 3 elements are force, fraud, or coercion. You need to be able to prove one of those 3 elements is in play by the person who's perpetrating these crimes, with the exception of child sex trafficking, and that's where our focus is going to shift tonight. Except with minors. So that minors, because we are, thankfully, a country that recognizes that children can't give consent to sexual activity, certainly not commercial sexual activity, especially with an adult, we don't have that as a requirement that you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. So any child engaged in commercial sexual activity is considered a victim of this crime of child sex trafficking. So you see the statistics on there. You know what? I'm so sorry. I'm like assuming that you guys are looking at the same thing I'm looking at. You can like flip forward quite a bit. Sorry, go ahead, keep going. Okay, you can stop there. There's a preceding slide. I'll just tell you. So the numbers, and it's really not a good way to. The numbers are all underestimates. Excuse me. But we think the federal government thinks that there's about 100,000 to 300,000 children in the United States who are being trafficked. 80 to 90%, I would say 90% upwards of those children are American children. So it's not true that children are being sort of imported into the country and being trafficked. These are our children that we're talking about who are being exploited right here in the United States. And actually, can I have you go to the one that looks like a map? We're just going to, yeah, okay, next one. And then, so our statistics show that, and it increased from 19 to 23 states that our children that we have worked with over the last 11 years, have been trafficked. And that kind of gives you a global picture of where our kids were trafficked. It's every single state has trafficking. Our kids in the state of Illinois, which is the next slide, were trafficked in, as you can see, all over the state of Illinois. And they get brought to us. And most of the time, children are brought to us from other states because it's important to get them out of their communities, sometimes out of their states, because we have one of the few resources that I'll tell you about in just a second. But it's important to get them out of their locale to be able to have them safely treated and to be away from the perpetrators. So the next slide is something that it helps me understand, it helps me explain what trafficking really is and how to understand it. So when you look at this, what do you see? Evil or good? How many people see good? Okay, and how many people see evil? Yeah, just so you know, as a psychologist, I can tell you that there is no bearing on the state of your heart and what you see. I actually see evil. I actually see evil in this verse when I say that, so you don't have to worry about it if you saw evil. But what their psychologists have done studies to look at the fact that we are all very good at looking at a crowd of people and seeing vulnerability. You show any of us a picture of kids on a playground. All of us can pick out the vulnerable children. The difference with how we use that knowledge is where things diverge in terms of people who are perpetrators and people who are all of us, the rest of us in this world. Because we can all see the vulnerability, and most of us see vulnerability in this room, in this world, as something that we want to take care of. We want to protect, we want to help, we want to lift up, we want to encourage, we want to do something to help that person who's in that vulnerable state, whether it's crying or their homelessness or whatever the situation may be. What is true, though, about perpetrators and traffickers is that they see that vulnerability as something that they can exploit, and that really is what exploitation is all about. The way that I used to explain exploitation to my children when they were younger, when they wanted to know what mommy does, which is a little hard to explain as a psychologist, but even harder to explain when you talk about working in human trafficking, is that most of the adults in this world care about children, but there are a few adults in this world that I need you to know about that don't care about children, and they make children do things with their bodies that they don't want to do. And that's a really simple way, I think, to encapsulate what human trafficking really is, especially child trafficking. It is about making a child do something with their bodies that they don't want to do, whether that's labor trafficking or sex trafficking. And then the next slide Children are vulnerable. This is kind of like our overall premises. Because oftentimes you will attend talks and people will talk about the vulnerability factors. Who are the vulnerable kids? And some of them consist of the same things that any child makes any child vulnerable. Poverty, all the different things that make child vulnerable. But by and large, what we want to help people understand is that any child who is left without adult protection is vulnerable. One of the first children that we worked with was only 9 when she was on the streets of Chicago, and she was what we consider a lockout child, which basically means that she was put out on the streets. Her mom did not care that she was out there. She was never reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She was never reported to law enforcement. So a 9-year-old baby girl is on our streets of Chicago walking by herself. We can all understand that child has no means of gaining shelter, no means of gaining income, to be able to get food, no means of doing anything really to protect herself. So when somebody comes along, an adult comes along, which in this case was her savior, the man who came along to offer her McDonald's became also her first trafficker. And so these are the stories that happen with vulnerable children. Any child who's left without adult protection is vulnerable to this form of predation. There's a quote that I love, the next slide that's Mother Teresa said, and I love this quote because it says, being unwanted, unloved, uncared for, and forgotten by everybody. I think that is a much greater hunger, a much greater poverty than the person who has nothing to eat. Now, this is a woman who worked her life with people who had nothing to eat, with the completely destitute people. And yet this is what she said. And so this is, I think, the greatest definition of vulnerability that we find with the children that we work with. So in the next slide, it talks about coercive control. And I'll just kind of help you understand that, remember one of the elements that has to be proving that something is trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. So these are the coercive tactics. And coercion is almost always an element in child trafficking. And so the coercive elements you see on the next slide talk about these elements of what coercion looks like. And this actually came from studies of this same list of tactics is used by people who torture. It's used by people who are, it's used against prisoners of war. It's used in domestic violence. These are all the same tactics. It's as if people got together and came up with the same list of things that they can do to break the human spirit, and this is a list that people came up with. These tactics are always an element of child trafficking. And one of the things that is the most important to understand when it comes to child trafficking, because most of the victims, I said to you earlier, I meant to mention this, most of the victims in our world, globally as well as in the United States, are adult victims. What is deceptive about that, though, when you say that, is that almost all of those victims who are now adults were children when they were first exploited. So one of the things we talk about is understanding the fact that this developmental trauma really impacts the person's life for the rest of their life. And so if you go to the next slide, what you see there is the biggest thing that is used in child trafficking is the element of fear. And fear has a lot, there's been a lot of talks about fear, and I think one of the things fear, certainly fear of being hurt, fear of being abused, fear of being killed, all of those are understandable fears. However, when it comes to children who are born in this dependent state, who are in a dependent state for all their childhood, it's important to understand that children, you can use elements of fear in multiple different ways. It could be fear of the loss of family. Perpetrators, when they threaten children that you're gonna lose your father. If you tell somebody, then I'm gonna hurt your parent. Or all those elements, any element that you see there of fear-inducing elements, are things that perpetrators use to keep children trapped in relationships with them that are abusive. Oftentimes the question is asked, why don't children disclose? Why don't they let people know? You don't hear, as we heard in this story before, we don't hear about these stories. And I'm really, really careful because it can sound like a victim blaming thing when you say to a child, why didn't you tell people before, as if something would have been done before. But unless you understand how vulnerable children are to being in that dependent relationship with somebody, and in this case a perpetrator, how vulnerable they are to all these elements of things that can be taken away from them very easily, then we can't understand why a child would stay in those situations. And I think that that's really critical, to have a heart of compassion for children and just how vulnerable they are to these tactics. So what happens is, when you have the coercive tactics that we saw before, you can go to the next one. When you have the coercive tactics, which create a traumatic relationship with the child and the perpetrator, and you have also those parts of the relationship that are good, then you have what's called a trauma coercive attachment relationship. And to kind of separate this out from what is commonly misunderstood as trafficking, or most of the trafficking cases, most trafficking cases are not like Taken, the movie Taken, where the kids are kidnapped off the streets or kidnapped in the parking lots, those types of things. And most of trafficking relationships start with actually a relationship, as I mentioned to you, that little girl. It's a relationship that's a relationship of trust. So it could be a parental relationship, it could be a relationship with a coach, it could be a youth group leader, it could be somebody who's sort of moved their way into that child's life in a position of trust, and they abuse that position of trust and authority to be able to create this relationship and this trauma bond. And it's extraordinarily difficult to break. And so the differentiation I help people, that helps me to understand this, is that if you have a kidnapping scenario, which is a more common scenario that we see internationally and globally with trafficking, so the person goes to the parent and says to the mom, I have this great job for your child. If you let me bring your daughter over to this other country, she can get this job as a domestic, she can break X number of dollars, she can bring like 90% of that, she can send 90% of that home to you. Then it turns out to be what it turns out to be, trafficking in that situation. The child, in kidnapping scenarios, it's the same thing. The child has witnessed the person who's now abusing her or him as lying, as doing something deceptive, so they can understand, they can create a psychological barrier between themselves and that person much easier, because they can recognize that that person's a bad person. Whereas if you approach a child and you build a trusted relationship with the child, which gets distorted over time in most of the cases with abuse and trafficking, you distort that relationship over time, then what you have is a very difficult bond to break, because that child has come to understand that this person has good parts. And in psychological terms, we call this intermittent reinforcement. And so the example I think that's helpful to understand is, like, if you have grown up with an alcoholic parent, and you are going to develop 10-foot long antenna to be able to determine whether that person's going to come through the door drunk, because that's going to determine how your night is going to go, or whether they come through the door sober or happy. That is going to, entirely how that person comes through the door is going to make or break your night. It's going to be a bad night or a good night based upon that one criteria. So children learn in those situations to develop a very close bond with the one who is actually hurting them for their survival, because that's going to help me get through that night. And in the same way, trafficking relationships, which form this trauma coercive bond, make it very difficult for children to recognize that this is a bad thing, or completely a bad thing, because it's not always bad. Does that make sense? So that's a really important thing to recognize, because oftentimes our kids don't recognize it. They don't identify themselves as victims. They don't reach out for help. They're in these horrible situations oftentimes for a long period of time before they actually get identified and get brought to help. And so if the trauma coercive bond is the thing that keeps children caught in this cycle, then what we are about doing is creating healing relationships. And that's the next slide. We can show children that there are adults who truly do care about them. Adults who, on a whatever night, this is Wednesday night, would come out and listen to these children's plight for no other reason just because they care. This is the world that we want to show to the children that come into our care, that there are people who really do care about them and are not there for some sort of secondary gain to exploit and to harm them. And so that's how all of our programs are really designed around, if you go to the next slide, around what we call the cycle of sexual exploitation. And you probably can't see all those elements, but just to kind of bring you around the circle. So 90% of our kids, I would say 95% of our kids were sexually abused prior to sex trafficking. And so that is the biggest vulnerability factor for all kids, I think, is because it predisposes the child to believe that that's a sort of normative relationship with an adult, is a sexualized one. And so once children have been sexually abused, once they've been exploited in childhood, it leads them into a whole host of vulnerabilities, including re-victimization. And so they have all sorts of school problems, they have behavioral problems, emotional problems, psychological problems, as you might imagine, re-victimization. They're also very vulnerable to domestic violence as they grow older, and intimate partner violence, as well as being involved with the criminal justice system, in that many of our, I'll say this, many of our girls are accomplices to crimes that they get drawn into with the person who's become her boyfriend. And then you have the traumatized parent, because you have a person who's never known what healthy childhood looks like, healthy parenting looks like, trying to parent a child. And so all of our programs are designed around healing some aspect of this cycle that we just reviewed. So I just want to tell you a little bit about our healing programs, and then I'll stop because I know that there's going to be time for questions. But so our mission is to forge healing pathways to be able to help children, once they've gone through these atrocities, to be able to heal from their trauma. And so if you go to the next, you can skip to the next one. These are our kids going on their first camping trip, some of our kids. You can go to the next one. So when we first started, we went to our law enforcement partners, particularly we work closely with FBI, and one of the things that we asked them was, what needs to happen differently in this whole scenario? Like, if we could do something differently, what would that look like? One of the things they said to us is that we need somebody available to us on a 24-hour basis. And, you know, we joke about this, but it seems to be the case that Friday at 5 o'clock is when all of our hotline calls come in, because everybody else is shut down. So we needed a response that could be a 24-hour response. So we created what's called our crisis response team. Melissa is one of our crisis response team members, who responds to the calls on really a 24-hour basis that come through our hotline of people who are needing help. We have a partnership with Metra, who Metra trains, because one of our kids told us that they are oftentimes put on the Metra trains to go meet people in the suburbs and then bring back the money to perpetrators in the city. And so we have this hotline that is available to anybody who needs help. And on the right is signs that we give out for hospitals, because that's a requirement by law that all emergency rooms are required to post about human trafficking. And so we wanted to give a local response so that we can deal with victims here in the United States, here in Illinois. And then the next slide. So we have specialized therapeutic programming. All of our, as a psychologist, that's really a passion point of mine, is that all of our programs are clinically driven. All of our programs give the children the best possible care. In all of our programs, they have therapists involved. In our residential programs, they see therapists twice a week. They have group therapies throughout the week. And everything that we do is therapeutically driven towards being able to help these children heal from these tremendous traumas that they've endured. What you see there, just so you know, is one of our girls, she was grieving the loss of a baby. And so she had written a letter to her baby, and she was sending the ashes up into heaven. And all the girls were singing with her. So that was a beautiful healing moment. But the next one is we offer trauma-informed education. And so in our residential programs, our goal is to help all of our kids graduate from high school at minimum, and then potentially even go on to college. But if that's their desire, or whatever path may be ahead of them. But our trauma-informed education means that in our safe house, we work with the kids. We online educate them, so that they don't have to go to public school and be matriculated, deal with the public school system in addition to their trauma. So they are online educated. We have education specialists to help them through their school day. So when they get triggered, which is invariably the case, when they get triggered during the day, they're having a tough day, they can be helped through their coursework, or they can take a break, or sensory breaks, or whatever they need to do to help them get them through their education. We've had many girls graduate from high school. We have had 3 now, I think, in college. Going to college, and so it seems to be working. So Cherish House, I referenced this. Cherish House, the next slide, is our safe house for children who have been trafficked between the ages of 10 and 17. It is the only safe house that exists in the whole state of Illinois, and one of the few in the nation that serves children as young as 10. As I mentioned to you before, many of our kids come from out of state, because it is a very unique resource. At Cherish House, all children get their individual therapists. They get therapy twice a week. They get group therapies throughout the course of the week. We online educate them, as I mentioned, life skills training. We also do a lot of fun things with them to capture, and maybe Melissa can help me remember some of these things, but we just had recently a Cherish House prom because they don't get to go to prom. So we created a prom for them. They actually wrote up a proposal on what their prom should consist of, and so we created that for them. Cherish House prom, we have a cook-off contest. We have all sorts of just fun things. Cherish House top model. We do all sorts of goofy and fun things with the girls. But it's a beautiful community where these children, these girls can heal and be able to be loved. They do devotions in the morning, and so it's a place where they can be loved and they truly can be healed. One of the things about all of our programs and our vision is to be able to create what we call a forever community. A community where they can know that they are loved. They oftentimes don't have family that can adequately support their healing once they've been healed or once they've gone through part of their healing process. So to be able to create a healing community, to be able to create His kingdom on earth for these children so that they can have support for the rest of their lives is our end goal. And so Cherish House is just the start of that. We also have, then what we found is when we return these children back home, they would, after this great healing experience, we return them back home, and then they would start getting re-victimized and hurt again. And so in 2020, in the midst of COVID, truly a God thing, in the midst of COVID, we opened up our next program, which is on the next slide, which is called Courage House, which is a residential program for 18 to 25-year-olds, so that they can continue with their next step of their journey as young adults to be able to heal, again, with the same elements of healing that I mentioned to you at Cherish House. They can grow up and they can learn all the things that they need to learn to become independent and free from any re-victimization or harm. And the next slide, we have a mentor program, of which these two beautiful women are a part of, mentoring our children on a weekly basis, being able to, we just did a video and one of Melissa's mentees was talking about how she'll give up her night with her family to be with these kids. They're just they're easy to love, but it's so important to be able to help change that equation that I mentioned before, which is that these kids need to know that there are good people in the world who love them and care about them. And so to have those experiences, to have a person who cares for you, who is just there for you all the time, is such a transformative experience for our children. And so that's our mentoring program. Go to the next one. We also do some education and prevention. We are very big on prevention in schools. We haven't done that much since COVID, but we were doing more of that in schools. But that's certainly something that we're passionate about, being able to reach children with that message. The reason I forgot to mention, the reason that we're called Reclaim 13 is that when we first started, the average age that children were first inducted into trafficking was believed to be between 12 and 14, so 13. And what we found, there's been some controversy about that, but not to get off on that tangent, what we found with our girls, all the kids that we worked with to date, with the exception of perhaps a handful of children, all of the children were trafficked, all of the survivors were trafficked at 13 or younger. So if that's the case, then what we need to do is we need to reach these children younger. And we're really big on, we need to be able to talk with children openly about sex trafficking. I realize it's a scary word to talk about, but we need to be able to, in a safe way, and we do that in a very safe way that's not scary. I told you how I told my children about what trafficking is. There are ways to talk with our children so that we can educate them and help them to be safe. So that's one of the things that we do. Go to the next one. I don't know if you can see that, but our Child and Family Program is one of our newer programs, and that serves child victims of sexual abuse. It's a partnership that we started with Lurie Hospital, Lurie Children's. When children are identified as child sexual abuse victims, so these are little ones, our youngest one is like 1, but 5 years old. When they're little and they go to the emergency room, they present to the emergency room for whatever reason, they're identified as child sexual abuse victims. We can pair them with somebody, an advocate and or a mentor. We have therapy for the child and or non-offending caregivers to be able to help these children, because again, the goal is to help them so that this never has to happen again in your life, because we know that that's a vulnerability for them if that continues. So that's one of our newest programs. And then I think Engagement, yeah. So, and engagement is where you come in. Engagement is something that we're very passionate about. When I first started Reclaim 13, I mentioned to you kind of how we started the organization. I was basically told that, there's really not a lot volunteers can do. The best thing the volunteers can do is maybe fundraising, but this is really a dangerous area. You just can't do anything. And I felt like I had just been called by God to do something about this problem, and in my own small way, and that was not the case. And so we're very passionate about that's not the case. If God calls you to this, then God will equip any of us. So there's always a place for any and all of us who feel called to be able to help out in this, to be a part of this, a part of the solution. So that's what the engagement is about. And then I mentioned to you 1 John 4:18. Actually, God said it first. But a marketing company came up with this beautiful logo for us, love greater than fear. What we tell our kids, that you have known great fear in life and great fear in the trauma that you've endured, and yet there is a greater power than the fear that you've endured, and that's God's love. And so that's what we try to impart into our kids every single day, and we do see the healing impact of that. So I thank you for taking the time to listen and learn.
Thank you, Cassandra. Really appreciate the presentation. You mentioned young girls. Do you work with young boys? Because I'm sure boys are exploited as well. And if you said so earlier, I missed it. I apologize. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I do tend to focus on the girls. So our programs, our 2 residential programs, are for girls or for females, but we do work with boys. We haven't. We would work with any boy. We worked with probably about 5 boys so far. It's a little bit of a different scenario how male trafficking is done, but yes, we would work with any boy, any child.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Two things. The work you're doing is amazing. Is there something outside this job that you're doing that is catching these people who are doing it to these children? What is being done to the perpetrators, if anything? That's one of my questions.
Okay, do you want me to answer that
Sure.
question? Yeah. So we actually don't do the recoveries. The recoveries that we sort of interact with come from our law enforcement partners. So they do the finding the guys only, finding the perpetrators, because
Right.
it's not always. Finding the perpetrators and then bringing them to justice, and then we take them off their hands with our crisis response team, the victims off their hands.
Okay. Another thing, the state of Illinois, I work for the Secretary of State as a school bus instructor.
Ooh.
And have you ever heard of BOTL, B-O-L-T-L? It's buses on the lookout.
Oh.
And every new bus driver in the state of Illinois, when they take their 8-hour class, has similar what you just presented on the coercion, the force, and all that. So all this I've heard already, and we teach it to every new bus driver, because they felt that not only bus drivers, but CTA drivers, those kind of drivers, they see these girls when they pull into the depot, and they see girls running in between buses, and they're there to watch and let them know that they can help them. And I'm going to just really quick give you for instance. I had a driver, I was a director for a school district, and I had a driver come in and tell me that she saw the same car at the same stop 2 days in a row, not picking anybody up. They were just sitting there. So I said, I want you to get me the license plate number and bring it in. So I called the cops. Well, the next day, the car was there again, and they were there as well. It turned out he had just been let out of jail as a pedophile and was not like 500 feet away from the bus stop. And she, I am telling you, saved somebody's life.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to tell our bus drivers. You know the parents that are at the stop. You know who's there to pick them up. Or if you see something strange, report it immediately. So we're really proud of this program that we started, that the state started here in the state of Illinois.
Good for you. Yeah, I've heard people go through that. But good for you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. What role do you play in protecting the children from the perpetrators approaching them again, trying to reclaim them?
Well, so two things. I think that sort of, again, long game. So we the safe house is they can't leave the safe house. The children can't leave the safe house. So and perpetrators can't come to the safe house. Don't know where the safe house is. So that's one thing that we do to protect them. To kind of what I think a lot of the work is helping them to understand helping these children to understand what was going on, because there's a lot of brainwashing that goes on that make it confusing for children to understand who this person really was. So that's what we do in a healing way, so that we keep them from wanting to run back to that person. Oftentimes the running back to that perpetrator is about the fact that they don't have any other options. So our model is about presenting them with another option, which is our community of support.
Hi, thank you very much. You do fantastic work. It's fascinating. I had known about your organization from Thea over the past several months, but also after I saw the Metra poster on your thing. I remember taking the Metra and seeing that, so it's kind of nice to see the intersection of that actually in the real world. My question, we're talking about reaching the children and educating them about the bad things about trafficking. And we all know the things that are taught to our kids in school.
Yeah.
Is this something that can be required? Are you working on a legislative level to have anti-trafficking training for our children in schools?
That's a really great question. And no, we're not yet. I think it's a great idea. How we usually present it to schools is Aaron's Law is required in schools. So Aaron's Law requires child sexual abuse education, and so we kind of tag along that. And just so you know, the way that we talk with children is in such a safe way that children, if you don't know what's going on, like I'll give you an example of a story that I used to tell children. I would tell children that I have a friend, he's a daddy now, and when he was little, he used to be in basketball. He loved basketball, and he loved his coach. His coach was like the best person in the whole wide world. And then over time, what happened with that coach, though, was that coach did things to hurt his body. And it became a really scary relationship for him. And that's all I said, like literally all I said. And I remember as you're talking with these little children, the fourth and fifth graders at this time, you can see their little faces. You can see like which ones I'm there for to talk to. But it's such a benign way. So one of the kids, actually one of the little boys, raised his hand and he said, what did the coach do to him? Like, did he make him run extra laps? And I said, baby, I'm not here for you, honey, but but all that to say, there are ways. Because I know what you're talking about. But yes, I do feel very strongly that our children need to be at least clued into something so that they can be protected. But yes, to answer your question, no, we've not thought about that. It's a great idea.
As a former headmaster and a retired pastor, I really applaud your work. It's quite incredible, and I'm really glad that I was here to hear this tonight. One of my questions, I guess, and it's a kind of crude question, is what do you need, and what can we? How do you continue to provide the resources that you do to make all this happen? I mean, where's that all come from?
Yeah, you talking about funding? Yes, we would love funding. So one of our big dreams is to be able, I should have brought a picture of it. One of our big dreams is to be able to create sort of make into reality our forever community model in the form of a campus that will house these children where they can grow up for the rest of their lives. They can have apartments. It's an apartment-based model where they can have their apartments. They can stay with us. There's also a community center in this place that we're envisioning, where they can come for mentoring, they can come for therapy, they can come for services and school, but they could also come back for Thanksgiving and Christmas because they don't have a place to go to. If you don't have family, to go to celebrate, we become their family. And so that's kind of one of our dreams. That's going to be a large $10 million project that we are embarking upon and trusting to God to bring that about. But so So our funding comes from multiple different sources. We have a church coalition. You can look on our website for all these things. We have corporations that partner with us. We have individual supporters as well, individuals and families. So pretty much those 4 buckets.
Any other questions?
So about 2 years ago, I was off of Randall Road in Elgin, close to the highway, and I witnessed a trafficking situation with a young girl. And I called the police station, but I was not taken seriously. Is it best for people when you witness something like this to call the police station, or is it better to call like the number that you had up on the screen? And then I guess also when you encounter something like that, any suggestions on how to navigate that? I was quite surprised at how I was not believed, actually.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I don't know if Melissa have anything to add as far as.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Melissa's on our crisis response team, so she handles a lot of our
Yeah.
calls.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having us. I would say, okay, oh, all right, I'll stand up. I love a microphone. No, so I would say it is very unfortunate that that happened. And we're actually doing a huge push to build relationships with all of law enforcement. So we have several people who are on our team who are going out and are building those relationships and just educating law enforcement and letting them know, because a lot of times, I mean, it's a situation that a lot of people do not think happens here. And that's one of the myths that we always try to dispel, is that it does happen here. I'm a mentor to a child who lives about 15 minutes away from here. And she was trafficked, brutally trafficked. And so it does happen in our backyards. And so we are really doing all we can to educate law enforcement. So my hope is that if you made that call today, that they would take you seriously, and because they've spoken with us and they are recognizing the issue and that it is happening around here. So I would say in those situations, I do think law enforcement is always the first. I really, especially in a situation like that where it's happening immediately. However, if there is a situation that you do want to get some more information, or you're unclear and you're kind of questioning, okay, is this happening? Is this what this is? Then by all means call our hotline, because we can help you with that then, and we can kind of walk you through the steps of what we could do and help you, so you're not doing this on your own and you are consulting with someone who hopefully can, has some answers for you.
I have a question. Is there something that we as individuals can look for when we're out? I mean, in the grocery store, is there any signs that simple signs that we can always put in the back of our mind to think about?
Do women want to jump in and help? The biggest sign is, most common sign, unfortunately, stereotypical, is an older male adult with a child, with a teenager. Now, that's really hard to identify because it could be a dad and a daughter. But usually the victims are looking down. They're not looking at other people. They're not engaging. They're usually taught not to talk, so they would not be engaging. For example, when they're pulled over by law enforcement, they're not to talk to them. And so, things like those, and again, going back to the vulnerabilities, anything that looks like a vulnerable child in a grocery store or any place out in public might be a scenario. Perpetrators, as was mentioned before about just tactics, perpetrators will frequent malls as places to find children, and they're looking for the same things that, again, go back to the vulnerability factors: the child who's looking down, the child who's by herself or himself, the child who looks very insecure, not confident. Those are all the same signs that we're looking at. Some of the things for children that we teach parents is that if your child starts coming home with possessions that that you did not give to them, or things that they could not afford, like a nice pair of tennis shoes, or with girls, like a new makeover or something that is something that they couldn't ordinarily afford, that's one of the red flags that is an indication that there's somebody else involved in the picture. We have a video, and I'm happy to share with you. It's called The Path, that was created out of Naperville Rotary gave us a grant, and so we created this video for the purposes of prevention and community education, but it kind of depicts the scenario through an actress and her dad. That can kind of help you understand a little bit more.
we could share that on in our newsletter.
And just something else too, when Cassandra was talking about if you see a young child with a male, we have actually worked a lot with a lot of kids who are actually trafficked by women. So we've had children who have been trafficked by foster mothers, by women who came into where they were working, so they kind of built a relationship there. So just because it's a woman with a child is not necessarily, mean that it's a healthy relationship.
Quick question. Actually, a comment and a question. Regarding working with the law enforcement, my first thought is to make sure that it's the 911 dispatchers that get that education. They're the first contact when somebody makes a phone call to the 911, because we've heard many stories where 911 kind of poo-poos and situation turns pretty bad. I just saw something where people are using certain sign language to quietly let others who are observing know that they are in distress or in a situation. Are you teaching any type of that communication, silent communication with somebody who may be observing, so that observer realizes they're being signaled to? Thank you.
Somebody came up to me the other day and they said, I don't remember what the signal was, but they gave me some sort of hand signal, like flashing a gang sign. They gave me some sort of signal. They said, did you know what this is? And I said, no, I didn't know what that was. And they told me it was a human trafficking, I'm in trouble sign. I guess my concern about that type of, or my thought would be that if I know that, then the traffickers know that same information. So what we try to do, what we create is a bracelet that has our hotline number on a band. And it looks like an elastic band. When we first created them, there was kind of a beautiful beaded type of bracelet with a band with our hotline number disguised underneath it. And what the kids told us was that they need something that they can hide quickly if the perpetrator sees it, and so this is too obvious. So we created an elastic band, kind of like kids put up with their hair, an elastic band with our hotline on it, and that's what we use as a way to give to kids. So that would be something that you could give out to, like if you came across someone who you think is vulnerable but you're not quite sure, but it's just a hotline number, and so they can reach out for help, and if it doesn't matter if it's trafficking or something else.
My thought is that children realize that they're taught that signal.
Yeah.
They should at the same time be taught that maybe display that signal. And
Sure.
when the perpetrator, in this case that I saw, somebody was driving, and a woman had her hand next to her head. The driver didn't see it, but it led to somebody being apprehended.
Good for them.
They're going to take time to try and educate the children.
Yeah.
To let them know that they want to be discreet as well as
Yep.
kids may understand that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
something I think could be useful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Question back here.
I'm curious to know, with the confusing times that we have with early sex education and the vivid materials that some children may be exposed to,
Yeah.
how does that play into the acceptance of the child, or possibly the confusion on the part of the child as to, is this normal, or is this in fact a deviation that they need to be aware of, and can they in fact be aware of it? You approached the benign comment in the way of a display of a story about the basketball coach. There are so many other subtleties here. Is this being addressed, and do you folks see this as adding confusion to the children?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You don't have to talk about, because trafficking typically starts with a nice relationship. In our mind, you're not doing prevention. You don't have to talk about the sexualized parts of the abuse, because if you're truly trying to do prevention and not secondary prevention, once it's already started, if you're truly trying to do prevention, the more key elements of what you need to teach children, in our mind, is to be able to teach them the healthy relationship dynamics between an adult and a child, for example. Because oftentimes it doesn't become sexualized for a long time. It could be like one of our girls was brought to a gym for a period of many months to be able to be paraded basically in front of the people in the gym for the purposes of later exploitation. But she thought she was going to the gym.
So the only way to reach children, I think, in my mind, is you don't have to get into the gory, graphic pieces of, the sexualized parts of the trauma. You can talk about healthy relationship and boundaries, in a way that is very safe for children and helps children understand that. The reality, having said that, the reality is that our children are being exposed at a much younger age to very violent imagery that is being portrayed through pornography. And at the age of 8, the average age the children are exposed to pornography is 8. And they're exposed to what we know now to be much more violent imagery. So children are not developmentally capable, I think to your point, children are not developmentally capable of understanding, first of all, understanding what they're viewing, but then also understanding that this is not normative behavior, and it's not a behavior that both of the people that are being depicted are wanting to be a part of. So I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Thank you. With the border situation that we've experienced the past few years, have you noticed a correlation between the quantity or type of victims you're encountering?
The quantity of the type in terms of sexual.
In terms of the border situation with the
I'm
number
sorry.
of migrants coming, have you noticed an increase in the number and also the type, their backgrounds, those kinds of things that, because we hear about, there might be families or children who come with adult males across the border who could be trafficking victims. I'm wondering if in your experience you've seen any correlation to that.
Yeah, we have not, I don't know why this is, but we have not, because we would be totally open to caring for a child who is here under those circumstances, but we have not ever been reached out to for a child in those circumstances, so I can't speak, so I don't know why.
Anybody else? Oh, yes.
I'm just curious, how many children have you taken care of and how many are in your care at the moment?
We just sent out a year-end letter, so I actually know this number. We've cared for about 200 over the course of this year, 200 survivors. And they're not all children. So our sort of mission area is people who are survivors of child victimization, so many of them could be adults. I don't know the breakdown of that. That's a good question that I should figure out. But about 200 survivors annually is what we typically serve, and they're throughout all those different programs that I mentioned to you, from the residential to the community-based programs and therapy.
Do we have any other questions?
Do you get an intake of your victims, you might say, from like what percentage come from, say, law enforcement delivering them versus self-presented, they walk in your front door or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of our referrals come from law enforcement. Increasingly now that we're, we've been doing this a lot longer, we get referrals from schools, and hospitals are also another big referral source. It is really, until COVID, I don't know why this changed, but until COVID, none of the calls were from victims themselves. They were always from referring sources, people who identified them or in the course of caring for them. Since COVID, though, we have received, we do receive calls now from victims asking for assistance, usually residential and shelter. And it's still a very small percentage.
I was just thinking about parents. Are there any parents in the picture for these kids ever, before or after you help them?
Yeah, we require parental consent to bring them to any of our programs, our residential programs, and so there's a parent or DCFS is involved. So more often than not, it's a parent who's signing consent over. And how I would think about this is, so they are involved, but oftentimes there are unhealthy situations that are going on at home, which is the reason why they first ran and the reason why they first got into reasons of exploitation. So yes, there are families involved, and we do our best to try to incorporate them. My background is actually as a family therapist, so our goal initially was to try to incorporate families as much in the healing process as we can. But the reality is also, by the time we get the kids, things have become pretty fractured at that point, and so we're just trying to create a larger support system around them.
If there aren't any other questions, we'd like to thank Dr. Cassandra Ma for what she's done and for coming out tonight, and also to Melissa and Larissa for being a mentor, because that's important too. We hope that you'll be able to donate to this great organization. Thea would like to thank you for your support this year and for staying involved and coming out each month. We really appreciate everyone being here. We greatly appreciate each of you showing up each month to be here to support and learn and to fulfill our mission of educating voters and challenging leaders. And we will continue to do that in 2024. From all of us at the board, we would like to say thank you, Merry Christmas, have a Happy New Year.